Okay.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeffery Giesener for the Obligations of Memory podcast. I'm with Blima Lorber, who is a historian, a journalist, and has about to share a presentation about immigrants coming to South America. So I'm going to introduce again Blima, and Blima, you'll show us the presentation. You'll just...
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm going to present a very unknown aspect of the Holocaust about foreigners in the Holocaust. Usually, the Holocaust is thought to have happened in Europe, right? We have also in Africa, North Africa. But there are not only European people that lived in Europe at that time. That time, there were many foreigners almost all over Europe living, working. They got married there, they had children, they had companies. Their life wasn't so different from nowadays. People would travel to visit. And inside this block, I'm going to show you what happened to Brazilians. People ask me, Brazilians? How come Brazilians? Yes, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of Brazilians living abroad, studying abroad, especially in France. Paris was a cultural center that everyone went there to study. So now I'm introducing to you Brazilians in the Holocaust. Yes, Brazilians, native and naturalized Brazilians. We have here several pictures of some people that were Brazilian born. Some of them were naturalized. We have some documents. We have here survivors. We have victims. We have resistance also. Resistance is one of my favorite topics too in the Holocaust. So everything started around 11, 12 years ago when I started searching to write about my father, about his biography, and I came up with a name, very Brazilian name, and this person was born in Brazil. And then it clicked me, and I said, how come? Like other people would ask me, Brazilians, how come? So I started digging into, and I found more people that were Brazilians living abroad, and they had their share in the Holocaust too. Some of them were Jews, some of them were not Jews. So we are going to start to know a little bit of their stories. Their lives are of so much interest, even if no one has written about them. Eric Hobsbawm, yes, nobody knows them. Only documents, maybe not even the family knows about them, right? 75 years after the end of the world, little is known about the fate of foreigners, including Brazilians who were in Europe and North Africa during this period. Nobody knows about them. This is one of the unknown things in the historiography of the Holocaust. My proposal is to open a place in history for Brazilians where victims sought to escape routes, because there were some people who escaped, survived, and fought against Nazi fascism. There is a bibliography about Portuguese and the Holocaust, Spaniards and the Holocaust, people who were in the international brigades in Spain that were taken to France. They were almost all of them foreigners, many different countries, and recently Peruvians in the Holocaust. The focus of the Holocaust is usually in Europe, right? So I'm trying to take this focus a little bit to Brazil and people to know what happened to Brazilians. It is a 13-year researching. Every day I put some more information on it. I always am looking for it. I travel to Europe several times to search. I went to several archives. I use internet very well. So decision to make the survey public after I read some comments on social media, such, I'm sure there are no Brazilian victims. This was in a remembrance ceremony about the Holocaust. And the next day, I read such a comment in the internet. So I decided it was time to put my research to the public. Also belong to a group for Latin Americans and the Holocaust. This group studies the Peruvians, the Brazilians, the Argentinians, and there are other countries involved in also this group. There are many, many other countries. First, we have archives barriers. Pandemics prevented me from further physical investigation and files. There is a lack of organized physical and online files. Documents were destroyed by perpetrators. Some documents may show things that countries don't want to be shown. They want to be shown. Some archives are only provided for family members, and there are still some languages and spelling barriers. A name can be written in many ways. Do you find the right way to write the names? Plus, there are languages like Greek and Russian that I couldn't still research, but I'll go on, okay? My criteria is Jews and non-Jews, natives and naturalized. Wives and children of native and naturalized Brazilians register at diplomatic legations. People that were killed or died and had their families destroyed. People who sought escape routes. Brazilian brigade refugees in France, resisting Nazi fascism several fronts, and diplomatic missions in Europe at the service of the Brazilian government that they were arrested during the war. Countries where I found Brazilians. Germany had a huge Brazilian community, but this community didn't suffer too much like in the other countries because at the beginning of Hitler period, many Germans and their families, even though born in Brazil, left Brazil to Germany in a program, Heim ins Reich, that promised wonderful things for those who would be going to live in Germany. But we have victims. France has the biggest number in my research with victims. Italy, Spain, Poland, Latvia, Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, Croatia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, North Africa, and some non-identified countries. The number of victims per country. France, as I said, had the biggest number. I found 37. Italy, 13. Germany, 5. Poland, 5. Austria, 3. Belgium, 3. England, 1. Non-identified country, 1. One of the victims from Brazil that was in Germany was Helene Bali Langer. Her nickname, Nene. Helen was born in Petrópolis, which is a state of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in June 14, 1888, and lived in Jena, Germany. In 1938, Helene was temporarily arrested and remained in the country because her adoptive mother was sick. She learned she would be deported in June 1944 and decided to commit suicide, jumping off a cliff on June 16. She knew she was doomed, as she knew what she was doomed to. Instead of suffering in the hands of the Nazis, decided her fate. Many other people also decided their fates because they knew what the Nazis would be doing. Boleslav Okuszewski, Kostev Okuszewski, Sofia Okuszewski. Born in Ponta Grossa, Brazil, the Okuszewski family was Christian and moved to Poland sometime before 1920. Boleslav, where you have here pointed, was a political prisoner, considered an enemy of the Nazis. He was taken to Austria, and he was killed on April 12, 1945, under the decree Nachtennebel, night and mist, in complete isolation. Prisoners were taken at night in the fog, and this action circumvented conventions regarding the treatment of the prisoners. His brother, Kostek, which was probably this one, okay, also disappeared, and his fate is unknown. His sister, Sofia, was taken to Auschwitz and then to Flossenburg, Germany, and survived. Okay. All the three were born in Ponta Grossa, a city in Paraná, Brazil. Naturalized Brazilian, Francisco José Messner, Franz Josef Messner, resistant and victim. He also was not Jewish, okay? A very important man. He was a Brazilian representative, vice consul of Brazil in Vienna before the war, from 1929 to some 1932-33. He also would take many steps to advertise Brazilian products in Europe, and he got jailed twice. The first time he was put in jail, he was in a ship from Brazil going to Italy, and he was caught by the French police. By the time the French, at the beginning of the war, the French would arrest people with German surnames, connecting them to Hitler. He was taken to Casablanca, Morocco, and stayed for a while, even though the Brazilian ambassador in France tried everything to free him. They didn't free him. He only was freed after France signed the armistice. Later, Francisco José Messner was caught because he belonged to a group in Austria called, caught for spying. He belonged to a group called Cassia Group that used to help allies during the war. He was taken to Mauthausen. This is a picture of him from Mauthausen, and all the group was judged and sentenced to death. He was taken to a gas chamber, and he tried to talk to somebody, but he couldn't because the Nazi chief was there. He couldn't talk, and he died in Nazi chamber. And 12 days after his death, the camp was liberated. Brazilian ambassadors didn't know about him, only the Brazilian ambassador in France, and nothing was done to help him. A Brazilian brigade victims. So the international brigade had several people from all over the world. This is one of them. He was born in the South Brazil. He was not Jewish. He went to Spain to fight Franco, but when he got there, the international brigade were already leaving and taken to France. He was taken to France. He was taken to Gers, where he found other Brazilians in the same camp, and they decided to run away, and they started a 120-kilometer walk during the night to arrive in Paris. They arrived in Paris and stayed for a while, and then they decided to cross the borderline, the liberate zone of France. During one of the days, he didn't feel well. The next day, he couldn't even speak. He had a general infection of a pimple in his nose. The next day, he died. And his mates, his friends, couldn't do anything. If they would go back, they would be jailed. If they crossed the borderline from the two zones, they couldn't come back to bring anybody. So he was 30 years old when he died. This is Ando Stern, survivor. He is the only one survivor. He passed away this year, 2 months ago, sadly, that had his life story told in a book. He was Jewish, right? He was born in São Paulo. His father was a doctor and started to work in India and took his family to India. And after a while, his family went to Hungary and stayed there. When the war began, his father just disappeared and understayed with his mother. And he was taken to Auschwitz with his mother. He was 14 years old and he escaped Auschwitz. He survived there, but he was taken to Warsaw later, and then he was taken in a death march to Germany. And when the Allied armies arrived in Germany, he was put in a train with other people, locked in a train without food, without water, to die from hunger. He didn't know how long he stayed there till the Allies got the train, the Americans got the train. He went back to Budapest to try to find out if his family was alive, and came back to Brazil without even knowing how to speak Portuguese because he left Brazil when he was 3 years old, right? This is the book about him, A Start in the Darkness. Stern is a start. So a star in the darkness. And he was such an amazing person because he worked till his last day of life. He would go and make conferences with people. He was such a nice person. He didn't have any hate in him. He was a wonderful man. It's a pity that people like him go away. Emilio Kerbo, internment camp and escape route. Emilio Kerbo was a naturalized Brazilian. He lived in Paris in 1938. He married Sarah Finkel and had two children, Mireille and Jacques. Jacques doesn't appear here. They were passport holders, but as Jews and foreigners, they had to register at the French police at the when in 1940. Emilio went to Vichy for visas to Portugal. As you know, there was a consul, Aristide Souza Mendes, who was giving visas for people to reach Portugal, even though Salazar didn't allow it, and he had to pay very hard for doing so. Upon crossing the demarcation line, Emilio was arrested and taken to Gurs, but he managed to escape. His wife and the daughter were in Paris when, on July 16, 1942, a stranger warned them that Jews were being arrested by the police. It was the day of their Hafle development d'hiver. They both managed to escape. The family received visas from Portuguese consul in Bordeaux, Aristides de Souza Mendes. Mireille is this girl. Mireille is the lady that was killed 3 years ago in France, Paris. She was stabbed 11 times and her body was burned in a hate crime. We had a jury this year that condemned the killer, and amazingly, I am friend of her sons, right? So I visited them and I got to help them also writing a book about the mother, where I got all the genealogical thread from Russia to France, from France to Canada, and back to France. It's amazing that you find people that are willing to share their stories. This is a story that really touched me very much. Leon Gradvol. Leon Gradvol. The Gradvol family was quite a well-known family in the North Brazil. They had a huge company in North Brazil, and the main office was in France. Leon would travel every 6 months from Brazil to France to buy merchandise, and there he met Esther and married her. Part of the family was living in Brazil, part of the family was living in France. So Leon and his son Michael decided to go to France and get the family out from France before it would be too late. When they arrived, their apartment, Esther had already moved with other children to a safer place. Their apartment was already taken by the Nazis. She was hidden in a little farm in Lens, France, and Leon found her. They could leave France to Portugal with visas from Souza Mendes, the Portuguese consul in Bordeaux, and with the help of the Brazilian ambassador Souza Dantas. Article. Brazilian pilots. Those are resistance. Pierre Klosterman and Cosme Gon. Both were born in Paraná, Curitiba. Pierre Klosterman received a telegram from his father telling, "Come to France, otherwise you won't be my son." So he decided to go to France and joined the French movement France Libre as a pilot. Later, he joined the Royal Air Force. He was taken to Royal Air Force. Those crosses here in black are all the planes, the German planes he took down. The ones in white were still in study to be put there, right? He was an amazing man. He went over 300 flying operations, and he survived the war. He wrote several books about this, and then he lived in France where he died. Cosme Gon was also a pilot. He was at RAF, Royal Air Force, also an amazing Brazilian. He went to many operations. When he was getting back from Italy, his plane was shot down and he was killed. He is buried in a French military cemetery called Calvados. He was 27 years old when he died. There are other Brazilian pilots that also fought against Nazism. Roland Michel Dreyfus, an armed resistance. He was born in Fortaleza, northern city in Brazil. He was working in a bank in France, and he was helping refugees, Jewish refugees at that time. He was visiting a Jewish lady in a city, and he was caught by the Germans, and he was killed behind a wall. His body stayed for a couple of days without any recognition. The only piece that could recognize him was his wedding ring with the name of his wife, and the day they were married. Years later, she recognized him by picture, and she got back the ring. On the place where he was killed, there is a plaque, La Mémoire de Roland Michel Dreyfus, victime de la barbarie naziste, mort pour la France. À 31 ans, fusillé pour la Gestapo. I don't speak very well, okay? Oh, in memory of Roland Michel Dreyfus, victim of the barbarism, Nazi barbarism, they called Mort pour la France is a distinguished, is something that distinguished them, that those who died for France, right? He was 31 years old. He was killed by Gestapo in August 14, 1944. Catherine Levy-René is a Brazilian woman who was born in Rio de Janeiro. She was living in France. Levy is her single name. She married René. She entered the resistance. And her name in the resistance, nickname was Josette Lepin. Carte de combattant, you see her resistance card here, right? So the women and resistance are now coming. There are plenty of studies now, searches showing women in the resistance area. She was one of them. There are other Brazilian ones, women that also were resistance. She survived, right? She belonged to 35th Brigade Marcel Langer. This brigade was from Moa, mão de obra immigrant, from immigrant hand workers, okay? And this brigade had, Marcel Langer was a Polish man resistance who lived in France and was taken by the French police, and he was killed for taking some guns and things like that. So the group started, put his name as a homage for the other resistant, right? Bruno Enei. Bruno Enei was born in Brazil, in São Paulo. His nickname in resistance was Tito Sperry. His family went to Italy, back to Italy. His family were immigrant Italians that came to Brazil. He was born in Brazil and took the boy when he was 11 years old. The family decided to come back to Brazil, but left Bruno Enei, Bruno, who was 11 years old, to study in Italy. He went to the university, right? And he joined a group of partigiani, which is partisans in Italian. And his story is told in many books in Italy. That's him here, right? He survived. He came back to Brazil. He was a professor at the university in Ponta Grossa, in Paraná, a very intelligent man, a very clever man. Sadly, he passed away when he went to the cemetery to the burial of one of his friends. He had a heart attack and died. He went all through the war in Italy and died in Brazil with a heart attack. Diplomats. This is Ciro de Freitas Valley, who was quite friendly with Germany. Brazil had some documents, secret documents. And those secret documents, the government stated that visas were not to be given to Jewish people, Semites, right? He was the one that followed everything about this. In the documents I found, there is written, he wrote to the foreign minister, what will those people do when they come back to Brazil? Brazil tried, there were Brazilians in Germany, because he was an ambassador in Berlin, that tried to come back to Brazil after the war started. At the beginning, they didn't want, but after the war started, many of the Brazilians that were in Germany were called for the German army because their parents were German. In Europe, you have the law of blood. So you have the citizenship of your parents. In Brazil, you have the law from where you were born. So they were Brazilians. So those youngsters tried to get back to Brazil, and he was just, what will they do? They don't even like this country. They've never been here, right? This is Luiz Martins de Souza Dantas. one of the Brazilians who is righteous among the nations. He granted visas for life, many, hundreds. He took actions to free Brazilians from internment camps. He tried to avoid Aryanization of Brazilians and Jews companies. He acted in favor of Brazil. He was threatened by Nazis when the Nazis took the embassy. They pointed a gun at his head. He suffered disciplinary proceedings because the government was against what he was done. He was taken to 2 internment camps with his group, all the diplomats in France, first to France and later to Germany. He stayed there in an internment camp for 1 year and 4 months, which was the longest diplomat internment. He was not young, and he said he wouldn't leave before the others. He would stay till the end. And government made his memory disappear because the government didn't allow visas for Jewish people. Right? This is a story just beginning to be written. I have a moral and a justice duty to make public the names and the life stories of Brazilians affected by the Nazi fascism cruelty. Let the world know about the courageous 140 Brazilians who fought in resistance, foreign legions, and allied armies. To promote thoughts about them and a note to Brazilians themselves. So my work is to encourage new research and let those people know about those Brazilians who people don't know. Review actions of the government and diplomacy for Brazilian citizens. So as other countries in South America, even in the United States, there were limited entrance of refugees. So some of the actions of the Brazilian diplomacy had to be known. There are only 2 Brazilians as writers among the nations. Souza Dantas and a lady, Araci de Carvalho, who was not a diplomat, but she was a secretary and a diplomat in the consulate in Hamburg, and she would facilitate giving visas to Brazilians. She hid Jews in her home. She took them to the border in her car. So she deserved the title of Righteous Among the Nations. That's it.
Well, very, very interesting, Blima, and I'm so pleased that you could bring your presentation to the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance groups in the Obligations of Memory podcast. Thank you so much. I had such an enjoyable afternoon with you, hearing about your family, your parents, the love you have for your parents and your siblings, your 2 brothers. And I want to encourage everyone to listen to the whole series and to watch the program of Brazilians and the Holocaust. So thank you so much, Blima, for participating in the Obligations of Memory podcast. And thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you, Jeffery, for this opportunity. I want you to excuse me for my English. English is not my native language. I try my best. And now I see on the slides that I have some mistakes over there, which I didn't see, and some came in Portuguese, but I think the story should go on. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and don't worry about anything. Bye-bye now, and bye everyone.